Hi, guys. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm joined by Amanda Morales Jackson, who is an Air Force spouse and a licensed clinical social worker. Hi, Amanda. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great this morning. How are you?
Great. And we were just chatting that we don't know each other, but like Amanda popped up in this shirt, and I'm like, I have that shirt. I almost wore it today.
Yeah, that would have been crazy.
It would have been crazy, but I love that, like, like when you're trying to break the ice with somebody, it's always like the weirdest things that you have in common that are like, oh, okay, today it's a shirt. And I'm only thinking of that because, Amanda and I do not know each other. Her husband is Air Force. My husband was retired Air Force. We don't know each other. And so one of the biggest challenges for these highlights is, getting to know somebody in such a short period of time in order to pull out to their story. And in the short amount of time that I've been able to speak to Amanda, I've learned a lot about her, and I think I'm hoping that you will share your military spouse journey, but a little bit more about what's happened to you recently, because I know everybody is really focused on all the military spouses who are losing their jobs because of the government cuts. And I did not realize that you were one of those spouses. So Amanda has graciously agreed to share that story with us. But let's start from the beginning. Can you share a little bit about your military spouse professional journey, and then maybe go into a little bit about more recent events?
Absolutely. I graduated back in 2019 with my master's degree in social work. And we were stationed over at McDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, one of our favorite duty stations. And at that time, we were pregnant with our oldest child, my son. And we were getting ready to kind of just establish life right there in Tampa. My husband had just come off of a deployment. We had just gotten married. And so I was geared up to be a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Florida. I think that one thing a lot of military spouses don't always consider is what military life could look like before they get married, right? And I was one of those. I was like, oh yeah, I'm never gonna leave Florida. I'm from Florida. Why would I ever leave? I love it here. And then I married somebody in the military, and it totally kind of went over my head that I could be up to go anywhere, right? And so I want to say maybe 6, 8 weeks after we had gotten married, that we received orders to Robins Air Force Base in Georgia. And so I was completely blindsided because here I just graduated, just walked the stage. I was all set up by my program as I should have been, right? To be licensed in the state of Florida and what that looks like. And now I was going to a new state that I've never been to. I don't know anyone. I don't know their laws, procedures, policies, and things like that. And so I had to start from the ground up, right? So we moved within, I think it was like a 60-day notice that we had gotten. So we moved very quickly. And then I was in Georgia trying to figure out, their versions of how do you register for internship? What hours do you need? Does my school count, right? Do they acknowledge my state of Florida education? And things like that, which they did because I went to an amazing school, Go Bulls, University of South Florida. But we went to Georgia, and I kind of got stuck in this period of I don't know anybody here. I don't know anyone professionally here at that, right? And so where do I turn to? Who do I look for? And so eventually I was able to say, you know what, maybe I need to pull my Facebook back open and start kind of crowdsourcing information and seeing if there were different groups out there that I could join. In doing that, I was able to join a number of Georgia social work groups, military spouse groups that were geared towards professional education, professional advancement, things like that. And through those groups where I was able to learn where I can and how I can attain the information to continue my education, continue my career, and things like that. Um, so we were in Georgia for maybe 2.5, 3 years. And right before I went from my internship kind of level licensure to my clinical licensure, we got another set of orders. And I was like, well, of course, here we go again, right? Perfect timing. And so now we were headed to Texas. And so that was a very scary part because Texas law and Georgia law are very different for how many hours you have to do clinically, what clinical skills and education and experience you have. And I was worried that when I would move to Texas, my license wouldn't transfer or they wouldn't acknowledge a lot of the work I had put in for the last 3 years,
Right.
right? So in doing that, I was like, okay, maybe what I need to do is start joining the different Facebook groups, social media groups that are in Texas to help figure out the reciprocity if there was any for military spouses. And so we were getting ready to PCS here, I want to say on Valentine's Day. We were supposed to be in Texas. And I took my licensure test in Georgia 2 days before, like 48 hours, seriously. And I was like, let me try to get licensed in Georgia to see if my license for license will be reciprocated if I go to Texas. And it's supposed to work that way, but how things go, it just didn't work out that way. So then we moved to Texas, and it took me about 8 months to get my license to be reciprocated here in the state of Texas. And so that took a lot of going to military family readiness to see if they knew anything that they could help me out, and they pointed me in some good directions. Trying to get in contact with the local behavioral health executive council to try to see if they could help. But really, it came down to meeting people in my social media groups that were military spouses and not, that could actually say, like, hey, I was licensed in the state of Georgia, or hey, I'm a military spouse and I've been licensed in several states. Here's a good way to go about it. And through that channel, I was able to find out about a military spouse kind of preference, if you will, in the state of Texas that would help me get my license faster. And so I was able to get licensed in the state of Texas, and that was great. And it took a while from just kind of trying to find a job out there, because sometimes there's that scarcity and that overflooding that we tend to see in the civilian world. And so I finally found a contract job to work federally, but as a contractor here at my base, where I actually go get my care and things at the hospital. So I was there for a little over 2 years, and I went on to maternity leave. We decided to have another baby. Yay, great. We go into maternity leave. Everything is kind of okay. I'm getting ready to get back into the work, and I get back in the office, and I'm there for, I want to say it was a full work week before we were told that they would be terminating our task order within 48 hours. And as you can imagine, I was absolutely shell shocked. So I was like, well, I just came off of maternity leave, so I wasn't prepared to go even longer without a job unpaid, right? Because there's no paid maternity leave in the state of Texas. So then there was that, and then there was also kind of, I felt a little hurt, let's say, because I was like, well, my job is important, one, because I'm giving healthcare, but I'm giving healthcare to service members, right? And I'm like, who's going to end up giving this care if I'm no longer here? And it impacted my ability to maintain relationships with my patients. And that was really unfortunate. And so within 48 hours, I had to out process. I did. And then that was 18 February. And now here we are, 2nd April. And I'm still out here looking for different positions and things. Um, to plug in Facebook and social media again, there were 4 jobs I was able to find just because people were posting them online within my military spouse. It was a military spouse mental health professional network that I saw 4 different job openings, and I was able to apply for all 4 of those. And unfortunately, with reconsolidation, rifts, and things like that, a number of them were canceled. A number of the ones that I applied for in USA Jobs was also canceled as a result of freezes and things like that. Because I think there's a current freeze right now. But if it wasn't for my military spouses groups, the people that I connected with to point me in these right directions, I wouldn't even have offers to be able to sign on and things like that, right? Which is, maybe that doesn't mean I'm getting in the door, but that means I have a foot in the door,
Right.
right? And I'm extremely grateful for those groups and those people who have led me in this direction.
No, that's awesome. And I have so many questions for you. I want to go back really quickly to what you were saying about how, yes, you losing your contracts impacts you and your family, of course, but it also impacts the veterans that you were working with, or the service members that you were working with. Um, that's huge, right? I mean, because I think when people hear about, people being downsized and losing their jobs, they think, oh, okay, well, whatever. But what they don't understand is that it's not just those people losing their jobs that are impacted, it's also the people who are benefiting from the services that you were providing, and this is like you are providing a direct service, right? You know, as everybody is in the government, but like this is like you knew, like you could see, you know, like you see them. And so you knew the exact impact that it would have. And I think that's something that people forget. So thank you for reminding us of that.
Absolutely.
Um, and then like, if you don't mind my asking, what happens when you lose your job like that, you know, with the federal government and, you know, because so many people are in that position, do you automatically go into unemployment with the state or what resource should military spouses know about if this happens to them?
Absolutely. So unemployment is available. That is something that is an option. And I remember as they called us and they said, "Hey, you have 48 hours to out process." My company was like, "Start the unemployment process now,"
Okay.
right? There are different 501(c)(3)s nonprofits that are out there that do help with like grants and things like that for military spouses. Actually, to kind of just plug this in really quick too, just because it came to mind. National Military Family Association, NMFA. While I was working on my associate license, I have to, do so many hours of supervision and that costs money. They gave me two scholarships worth a couple thousand to be able to pay my supervisors so I didn't have to come out of pocket for that. Because they knew that my husband at the time was junior enlisted. So it wasn't like we were making this ton of money that we could just shell out at the same time for supervision. And so NMFA is one of those 501(c)(3)s that will help with resources like that. And they have other ones for military spouses, like childcare and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if they had different grants. But just scoping out the different organizations that are geared towards military families and seeing what they have available. Sometimes you have to click and click and click to be able to really find it in there, but they are available and they're there for you. So, a lot of people don't know that they're there. And so I definitely encourage that research so that you can find those different organizations that are trying to help, that they have the funds that they're just ready to give out.
No, that's a great tip. And also, I would also add on there to look at your state and local resources too, because I
Absolutely.
think they have them as well. So, great tip. And I think that's something that, you know, because when it happens to you, you're shell shocked. And so you're like, yeah, okay. You seem to be more of a go-getter to where, like, as soon as it happens to you, you hit the ground running. You're like, I'm going to start researching this now. But for the people who aren't out there, it's a great reminder that, yeah, something horrible is happening to you. But when you catch your breath, remember that there are resources, there's money out there to support you. Great
Yeah.
reminder.
Absolutely.
So you talked a lot about the importance of social media in your life and, you know, the importance of Facebook groups and so on. But you also talked about the brick and mortar um, organizations like military, you know, the family, airman family support. Like, can you speak more about that? About I mean, you spoke about how you use your Facebook groups to kind of mine for jobs, but like, what should people expect if they're going into a brick and mortar office? You know, their family support centers. Like, what can they expect there?
So I think the biggest help that I received was the resume tailoring. So that was a big one. They gave me a lot of resources to help me learn, like, oh, you should phrase your resume this way if you're looking for a government, like a civilian GS position. This is how it should look when you submit your application, and your resume needs to include all of these things. So it wasn't always that, and I think this is where a lot of spouses that I've spoken to before sometimes they get like put off a little bit is that they think they're gonna walk into like military family readiness and meet a social worker who's like, oh, I have all the keys for you. And that's not how that works at all, right? They may have some, maybe they've had experience with a social worker before, and they're like, oh, we've pointed a social worker in this direction, or a social worker has told us about this resource that now we can tell you about, right? But there's more of those general things that they're really good at. They'll tell you, oh, there's this website, USA Jobs. Not a lot of people know about that. A lot of military spouses may not know. USA Jobs is a good place to apply to different positions, and you want to use your military spouse preference. I didn't know that was a thing, military spouse preference. And then I didn't know, not only did I not know military spouse preference was a thing, but there was a form that you had to fill out that you have to submit with your military spouse preference.
Right.
And they showed me what that form was, how to fill it out properly. Again, the resume tailoring that they were really helpful with. So I think sometimes it's those like smaller details that we sometimes overlook and don't know about. But those add up to like really getting you in the door with certain places or ahead of people if that's, kind of where you fall in the line with your preferences and things like that.
No, that's great because I think a lot of people forget that there are brick and mortar places that they can go and actually meet people, take classes, and most of the stuff that they offer is free. So,
Yes.
I mean, before you go and pay for something, like go look at what classes they have, what services they have for free. I mean, that's great reminder. So, do you have any tips out there? I know you gave some earlier, but I wonder if we could foot stomp some of them. Do you have any tips out there for military spouse social workers on maintaining a career through PCSs?
Woo, that's a big one, right? So this is my second PCS, and we're gearing up for another one in a year. So I think that once your spouse gets that email that says congratulations, right? And you're all excited, like finally I get to leave wherever I am. Like right now I have the PCS itch, so I'm like, where are we going next? But as soon as that email comes across, start your research. Look up I was gonna say the Texas state, wherever you're going, the states laws, requirements, and things like that, so that you kind of get a head start on, okay, this is what I understand is going to be needed from me. I can start this paperwork. Sometimes you have to backtrack years and years for different states. So for Texas, I had to go back like 5 years to a supervisor that I had at a job that I stayed at for maybe 8 months or something. And so before I was able to move here, when my husband had got that email saying congratulations, I was able to start reaching out because that could take time, right? You're going back to old connections. So start looking at, your state and what the requirement, or the new state and what the requirements are there. Start joining the Facebook groups. Sometimes they have these weird questions to be able to be allowed in the groups. And they're like, are you in the state of Texas? And you're like, no, I'm not. But let them know, no, I'm not now, but I will be, so that they still invite you in and allow you in, so that you can start asking those questions. And don't be scared to ask. I think that one thing I've had to learn as a person, but definitely as a military spouse, is asking for help is okay, and then receiving that help is also okay. Because I'm going to go to another state here in a year that I've never been to, that I know no one. And so I have to ask these questions, or my career will take a little bit of a hit. But
Right.
I also think that giving yourself grace, showing yourself that grace, that maybe things don't happen on your timeline, or you might find a little bump here or there in the process of trying to transfer your licensure, doesn't mean you need to stop. Doesn't mean, like I think you said, catch your breath. And I really like the way that sounded. Like once you catch your breath and you're like, oh gosh, I'm moving. Oh gosh, I don't know how it works, take a minute and just be like, okay, but there's resources out there. There's resources online. There's resources at my base that can potentially point me in the right direction of places. Um, and so I think that all of that is really helpful for keeping licensure. And then I also think that one thing we need to do more as military spouses is network with each other, because every time you move a state, the people that you leave behind that are civilians and have no tie to the uniform, they move on with their life, and they, potentially forget you and things like that. And so sometimes they don't want you knocking on their door several years later for a reference, right? So make connections with other social workers that are tied to the uniform, because they'll get it on a different level. And then you have those references. You always need about 3 references, right? So make at least 3 military spouse friends that are social workers, that you can email once a month or something like that. Just be like, hey, this is where I'm at in life, just to kind of keep you up to date in the event that I ever need you as a reference. And then you just keep it that way, so that when you get to that new state and you need to send in all that paperwork, or you get to a new job, you're not PCSing, but you get to a new job in your current duty station, and you need 3 references, that you have those and they're from all over.
And don't forget veterans too.
Yes,
Like anywhere
absolutely.
you put like military spouse or veterans,
Yes,
put veterans in there.
interchangeable. Yes.
Yeah. And you said that you're like attached to a uniform. So that, yeah, you
Yes.
said that. No, so I really love one thing that I love about you is that you're really good at finding resources. And, like I think I would encourage you and people like you, because you guys are go-getters, I think you do it anyway, but pay it forward, right? Because like you have found an exhaustive list of resources for Texas, and I'm sure you had one for Georgia and for Florida. And so I think it's so cool that if someone contacted you and said, hey, I'm going to Texas, I'm scared, you're like, let me give you the checklist.
Come here.
What you need to do. So I think that's so powerful. And when you said, and music to my ears, when you said, hey, network with other military spouses. And I think, a lot of people, think networking is just like, all the fluffy stuff. And I'm like, it's not fluffy. It's like, let's get down to work. Like we're
Right.
networking for the purposes of making each other's lives easier. And that is such an incredible gift. If you could just hand somebody like, hey, here's a checklist of what I had to do in Texas. And all I ask is when you're in a situation, pay it forward and give it to the next person, right?
Absolutely.
Because I think that is the biggest gift of knowing military spouses or veterans or whoever or allies in your next location is that they kind of have that how-to guide.
Mhm.
And, I'm like, I think that is the hardest thing for military spouses that was we move from installation to installation. And that's exactly why I started NMSN was because I'm like, I don't want anybody to have to come into the DC area, which is really hard to, like break into without, and like they don't have a network. So it could take us like 18 months to find a job. Well, you're halfway out the door at 18 months.
Right.
So I'm like, if there's anything we can do to kind of, shorten that
Mhm.
timeline and like soften that landing. And it's exactly what you were saying, where, like do the research. And I would just add share the research. Because,
Absolutely.
you probably, it took you 16 months or whatever to build that research and everything. I'm like, to me, what a gift it would be if, like somebody came in and you're like, here, this is what you need to know about your licensing. This is what you need to know, or at least, get started because I think that's so I think that's so important. I love that you mentioned that networking is just key because it absolutely is. It's what's going to be the difference between finding that next job faster or else having to languish and like, work through the system and finding it out as you go. So I appreciate you saying that. So your comments about the challenges about deployments, absolutely resonate, about giving you grace and everything. Because you're right, you were talking about give yourself some grace, and that goes with housework as well, right? Because, sometimes things have to give. So can you share some of your best resources and experiences for like successfully balancing juggling the military lifestyle with your career? Because you're so good and positive about like, you're currently now looking for positions, but you're still moving forward. You're not down on yourself and you're not focusing on those three that you lost. You're focusing on the one that you're moving forward with. So how do you get that mindset? And like how does someone go about successfully balancing the lifestyle and the career?
Absolutely. So, balance is a big word. I think a lot of people think that balance means that everything has to be even on both ends of the scale. And sure, yeah, that's kind of the definition of balance. But in order to really find that balance, that means that different sides have to make some kind of sacrifice, right? And so maybe that means I have to stay up later at night to review the Texas Administrative Code for how to get my license. But that means that the laundry did not get done today, and that's okay. I think that that's how you find that balance is allowing yourself and giving yourself that grace to be like, okay, some things are going to have to kind of be put to the side for a second so that I can focus on this. Maybe I had a longer day at work. And so that means I didn't get to wash the dishes tonight, but okay, I can get to the dishes tomorrow if I need to, right? And things like that. I think that's where that balance comes into play. And so, not beating yourself up about whether things are getting done, everything on your list is getting checked off, but also with your career, right? Sometimes there is a little bit of a slowdown in some careers. That's kind of just a natural progression for a lot of people, but especially for us, military spouses, and those transitioning from wearing the uniform and things like that, right? And so, I found that maybe, for one thing, when you apply to government jobs, one thing that they ask is, why do you have this gap in your employment? And I'm like, well, because I PCSed and I had to find childcare. I had to find a house. I had
Yeah.
to have a baby, whatever your PCS looked like. And or whatever the case was, that you have that employment gap. But maybe you're able to do something for an hour a week to say, oh, but I was employed, but it was unpaid work, volunteer, right? And that helps cover these gaps and it helps continue your career. So there's things where it's like, maybe there's different nonprofit organizations that somewhat align with your career, right? Social work, for example, we are so broad that I could do almost anything and it be considered social work. And so, maybe you volunteered at the adoption agency to file paperwork or something, right? That's a case management idea, right? And maybe those things that you do, though they're unpaid, can help cover gaps. right? But I think the most thing about balance that I find is it's okay if the house doesn't go swept for 2 days. It's okay if maybe I didn't study for my license test 3 hours today, I only did an hour because I had to go to a baseball game for my son or something like that. And having that grace for yourself to say it's going to ebb and flow and that's okay. Um, because it doesn't just mean things are just across the board neutral. Everyone is happy everywhere and that everything is just all green. That's just not realistic.
No, and I love that you said that because that when I was working full time and then someone had asked me to write part of a book, and my husband was deployed and he came back, and that's a reintegration period, and you're like, okay, that's great, but here, this is your schedule now because I have to go do this. And so I would go to work full time, I would come home and I would write, and I would write until it was bedtime. And I did that for like 3 months. And so in that 3 months, I didn't get to go to any of my son's baseball games. I didn't get to do any of his like Odyssey of the Mind things, and they ate a lot of takeout.
Yeah.
Um, and I look back at that and I'm like, I think it would have been easy to kick myself for that, going, I am the worst wife, the worst mom. But I think, like you said, giving yourself grace, I'm like, look, we're all just trying to do the best we can. And like, we don't need to be living up to like some idealized version of the perfect mom or the perfect wife. I'm like, we're all just trying to survive here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that one thing, I love that you mentioned that because it made me think of something that I hear often as a military spouse and a military spouse that has a career. They're like, oh, you're Superwoman. No, no, I don't want that title. Don't call me Superwoman because I'm not trying to stretch myself thin. I'm just trying to do what I can to get by and
Yeah.
make it work. And as long as there's the roof over our heads and food in my kids' bellies, we're okay,
Yeah.
right?
And this
And
is what I want to be my norm. Like this is what I'm doing.
right,
Like I want to go back to like the balance and
right,
the, yeah. And so I think that is important for people to understand because I think they look at people and they're like, "Oh my God, she can do it all. I should do it all." And I'm like, "Okay,
right.
if you think we're doing it all, you should see our house."
Yes.
Or like you should see what my kids do.
Everything that was here, I pushed into the hallway
Right.
on the video.
Right. Or you should see like how many times like they're eating something out of the freezer, or, like or
Yes.
like a balanced meal is a lean cuisine because I mean, hey, if they put it in a box, it's got to be balanced, right? So yeah, no, I think people do. I think it's interesting that we look at other people and we think, oh, that's what we should be, and not knowing what's behind the curtain. So
Absolutely.
thanks for
Absolutely.
the deal. So I have had such a great time talking to you, and thank you so much for being candid about, the job losses that are happening and the resources that are out there for people. And we wish you all the best in your job search. You will be fine. Um,
Thank
in
you.
in parting, is there anything that you would want other spouses to know, whether they're military spouse social workers or just military spouses who, like you guys are halfway through a career, right? Like you were like your husband's gonna stay in as long as he can. So is there anything that like, you're halfway through, um, that you could just say, like do this and you'll be fine?
I'm going to say network, make the connections, and you will be fine. Because if I have established, me, Amanda, I've established a relationship with another military spouse, whether it's they're a social worker or, they work at the CDC on base or they work at the library, whatever. I know what it's like to be in your shoes of moving jobs and things like that. I want to be the resource that you're like, hey, yes, I have this reference. I will do that every single time. And there's a lot of military spouses and other people attached to the uniform that will do that. And so make those connections because you can't do it by yourself. You are only one person with so much energy and so much resources and so much knowledge. Find the other people that will give that to you, that will pour into you, and they will be there for you. And it's going to make 100% of the difference.
And then pay it back.
Yes, every time.
Love it. Thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you guys for joining us. And thank you to our friends at USAA for making these conversations possible. USAA has a bunch of resources for people, so make sure you click through the link to find all that information and their resources. And we hope you will be here again next week for another great highlight. Until then, see you guys. Bye. Have a great week.